Why don't you live with us, Mom? I bet it'd be fun for you too. What's your problem with that? I know all too well why he suddenly brought up the idea of living together and what he's really after. I also know their eyes are always on my bedroom. The place we're in now is just too cramped. Can't you just look after Susie for us at least? When my granddaughter was treated like an object, something inside of me snapped. My name is Catherine Wilson. I'm turning 74 this year. 3 years ago, my husband, whom I had been with for many years, passed away, and I now live alone. The house is too big for just me, but it's filled with memories of my family, and I hold it dear. I've been thinking about selling it and moving into a condo, but I haven't made up my mind yet. My son, who moved out long ago, has his own family. When his daughter was younger, they'd frequently visit, but not so often now. My husband and my son never really got along. My son always found my husband, who was strict and couldn't stand dishonesty, to be a pain. After seeing each other at my husband's funeral 3 years ago, they haven't reached out regularly. Yet, the reason I can still live so vividly is because I volunteer at places where one of my friends recommended me. Thanks to an old friend's recommendation, I volunteer at a private high school, teaching floral arrangement and the art of afternoon tea. Not only was I happy that my skills were being put to use, but interacting with the students pulled me out of the depths of loneliness. I'm so grateful to the friend who got me out of my shell after losing my husband. One day, I came home and noticed a missed call on my smartphone. Displayed on the tiny screen was a familiar number. My son, Bob, is a 47-year-old employee at a company. It's rare for him to call me during the day. I quickly called back, curious if something had happened, and he picked up right away. Even though we hadn't been in touch so often now, a call from my only son made me elated as always. Due to an upcoming transfer, Bob's gonna move away from his current job and apparently move closer to my place. I'd like to catch up, it's been a while, he said. I was thrilled and quickly replied. He's gonna bring his wife, Lucy, and their daughter, Susie, along. A few days later, when my eldest son and his family showed up at my place, they looked a tad tense at the entrance. Sorry for coming over unannounced, Mom. Everything's been a whirlwind on our end. But we wanted to let you know. Brief greetings aside, I invited my son and his family, who had traveled a long way, inside. Lucy exchanged an awkward hug with me, and Susie, hiding behind my son's back, gave me a slight smile. Though Lucy's behavior might have some reasons, Susie should have been used to being so attached to me from when she was little. Seeing my beloved granddaughter acting so shy with me made me feel a bit lonely. There was an awkward tension in the air, but there might have been changes in her mind since she lost her grandfather 3 years ago. In the living room, Bob and his family promptly started enjoying the tea and snacks that were served. The reason for Bob's move was a job transfer, forcing him to leave his company-provided housing. Starting with tales of his struggles at work, Bob went on to rant about the sudden transfer. Throughout his tales, Lucy and Susie remained silent. I'm sorry I couldn't visit you more often, Bob said with a serious look on his face. Ever since Dad passed away, I've been worried about how you've been doing all alone. Let's keep in touch like we used to. I was genuinely pleased with my son's offer. While my volunteer activities kept loneliness at bay, it didn't completely eliminate my everyday concerns. Even though I'm still healthy and active now, there might come a time when I'd need assistance. Aging comes with its inevitable decline, and no one is exempt from illness or accidents. However, there was something slightly off about my son's words that niggled at me. From the time my granddaughter was born until she started going kindergarten, Bob and his family lived in this area. Back then, Bob and his wife left little Susie in my care while they lived their lives as they pleased. I adore Susie, treating her as if she were the apple of my eye. It wasn't that I minded taking care of my granddaughter. Due to the whims of Bob and his wife, I was worried about my grandchild who was often left at my place for extended periods or taken here and there. I wonder if Susie feels loneliness again due to the recent move. Seeing Susie's downcast face, just as I was about to say something, Bob interrupted me. Now that we're no longer in company housing, our rent and living expenses have shot up. When they were in company housing, they apparently didn't need to pay much rent, and utilities were covered by the company. Given the move during summer rates high, the expenses for moving must have been significant. What Bob approached me about was asking for a bit of financial help with living expenses. The issue was the amount. When he mentioned he needed about $2,000 a month, totaling $6,000, I was genuinely taken aback. Could a simple job transfer really require so much money? It felt suspicious, but it was hard to pry for more details in front of the grandchildren. Bob kept saying if he could get help for just the first 3 months, he'd figure something out after that. He seemed genuinely sorry. Seeing both Bob and I fall silent, Susie cast a troubled look and looked down. Well, if there's anything I can do, I'll help. Seeing my granddaughter adjusting to a new living environment and looking lost, I said that in response. If my husband were still alive, he might have told Bob, "You should stand on your own." However, knowing that Bob and his family had no one else to turn to, I couldn't push them away. When Lucy married Bob, she was strongly opposed by her parents due to their religious differences, and they've been estranged ever since. Since they can't rely on her folks, I'm their only hope. Realizing they'd get financial support from me for a while, Bob left with his wife and daughter to their apartment. Susie kept glancing my way till the end, but was soon out of sight, pushed gently by Bob. From that day on, Bob and his family began to frequently barge into my house. I rationalized it as just being financial assistance for 3 months. However, to save on groceries and utilities, they often stayed overnight, which soon became a concern. They would eat everything in the fridge without hesitation, so not just the food costs, but even the effort of shopping increased. Yet, Bob and his wife never offered to help with the shopping. While Bob was working and Susie was attending high school, Lucy wasn't currently employed. If things were tough, she could get a part-time job or something. I sometimes felt like asking her, "What do you do all day?" But whenever I tried to address it, Bob would subtly defend her. I knew Bob was deeply in love with his wife, Lucy, who's 10 years younger, so I couldn't openly confront them. I'd remind myself not to interfere in another family's matters and took care of Bob and his family in the beginning. However, it wasn't just meals, but they'd also ask for pocket money and groceries, and it became routine. That wasn't my only concern. I noticed that Susie always looked sad and hardly ever talked. She should be enjoying her high school days the most, but I felt no vigor from her. She wouldn't join in on her parents' conversations, and even when I tried to initiate a chat, she'd just give a faint smile. Especially when I asked about her school life, she'd look like she was about to cry and shake her head. Oblivious to her feelings, Bob and Lucy would drink and laugh as they pleased. My distrust towards Bob's family grew over time. Claiming to go to the bathroom, Susie left the living room. I discreetly followed her. Instead of the bathroom, Susie entered my room upstairs. What I witnessed there was my granddaughter frantically rummaging through the drawers with a distressed look. It was clear as day that she was searching for valuables like bank books, checkbooks, and cash. I was so shocked that I was at a loss for words. Trying to stay calm, I waited in the hallway leading to the living room, hoping for Susie to come back. "Grandma?" Realizing I had seen her going through the drawers, Susie bit her lip hard. She hadn't taken anything this time, but she was obviously after something valuable. However, I couldn't bring myself to scold her and instead kept my thoughts to myself. She isn't the type to do such things. "Susie, are you in some kind of trouble? If there's something you can't tell your parents, why don't you talk to Grandma?" Speaking softly so Bob and the others wouldn't hear, Susie, shaking her shoulders slightly, slowly turned around. She seemed hesitant to answer. Almost as if she had been forbidden to talk to me. "There must be things you can't tell your parents. Grandma's always worried about you, Susie." After a moment of hesitation, pushed by my insistence, Susie slowly began to speak. "Yeah, well, in high school." Just then, Bob appeared in the hallway. "We gotta go home, it's getting late. Your mom's ready to leave now." "Got it." The living room light was behind him, so I couldn't make out Bob's expression. Susie quickly looked away and headed to the living room to get her things. I silently watched as the three hurriedly left my home. From the other side of the nearly closed door, I was taken aback when I heard Bob raising his voice at Susie from the other side of the door. I could distinctly hear, "You know what happens if you say unnecessary stuff to Grandma, right? Bob and his family are hiding something from me." Disturbed by the events, I confided in a close friend. Although I felt bad for airing my family's dirty laundry, I briefly explained the situation. After listening, my friend was certain that Bob's family was acting strangely. "The one I'm most concerned about is your granddaughter, Susie," she said, and I had no words in response. From then on, I started consulting her about the issues with Bob's family. When my eldest son's family moved in, the peaceful life I had been living changed dramatically. Bob, who never mentioned living together when my husband was alive, suddenly said he wanted to move in with me. Bob and his wife both pleaded with me, asking if they could stay in my house. Ever since they moved in, I've been continuously drained of money. I had initially promised to help them out for 3 months, yet here they are, still lingering in my home. There were other burdens piling up, making it hard for me to give a positive answer. Seeing my hesitation, Bob visibly sighed in disappointment. "It'd be fun for you too, Mom, if we lived together." "What's the issue?" I wanted to retort. "The fun's probably just for you," but held back. Since they started imposing on me, I've been overwhelmed with chores and shopping, wearing me out mentally and physically. I've been so distracted I can't even focus on my volunteer work at the local school. Even the students have expressed their concern. If we live together, how much will I end up working for my son's family? The thought alone terrifies me. When Bob realized I wasn't going to give a favorable response, he clicked his tongue in annoyance and pointed to Susie. "Our current place is just too cramped. Can't you at least take care of Susie here?" "Hold on, Dad. We shouldn't burden Grandma like that." However, Lucy chimed in, agreeing with Bob's suggestion. Susie resisted till the very end, but ultimately, she couldn't go against her parents' wishes. Almost forcibly leaving Susie at my place, Bob and his wife held hands and headed back to their own home. This is just like when Susie was little, isn't it? Always doing as they please, and just using Susie for their own convenience. Days later, when I saw the limited belongings of Susie they'd sent over, I was livid. Honestly, I want to sever ties with Bob and his wife. But doing so would leave Susie without a place. And so, my life living with my granddaughter began. Unlike Bob and his wife, Susie often helped around the house and never asked for an allowance. Strangely enough, since Susie came, Bob and his wife hardly ever barged into my house. Thanks to that, my burdens lightened considerably. The only concern was that Susie often seemed down. Other than that, life with my lovely granddaughter was delightful. Susie, as gentle and sincere as ever, would help with the chores even when coming home late. But, a single remark from a friend I met after a long time plunged me into despair. "Is your granddaughter attending school regularly? I often see her around here during the day." "Huh?" It seems my friend has spotted Susie wandering around this neighborhood during the daytime on several occasions. Susie seemed aimless, often going in and out of parks and libraries. My friend even mentioned seeing her enter my house during the hours when I was volunteering at the high school. I couldn't confidently say that Susie was indeed going to school regularly. When she came home late at night, she always looked exhausted and didn't seem to be enjoying her school life. A part of me felt guilty for doubting Susie. But I couldn't ignore it. Without telling her my detailed plans, I left the house and decided to come home at an unusual hour to observe what Susie was up to. As I quietly approached my room, sure enough, there was Susie in her school uniform, rummaging through drawers and cabinets, pulling out checkbooks and bankbooks. "Susie, can't you just tell me what's going on?" Caught off guard by my voice, Susie froze on the spot, clutching the checkbook and bankbooks. After a few moments of silent staring, she began to sob. Words to beg for forgiveness poured out of her mouth time and time again. I don't mean to blame you, I said as I hugged her, and Susie tearfully spilled everything. It all began a few months ago. It turned out that Bob and his family had to look for a new place to live. But it wasn't a job transfer that forced them out of their company-provided house. Bob had caused significant trouble at work and was forced to resign, and consequently, they were evicted from the company housing. The financially strapped Bob and his wife, with Susie in tow, apparently decided to move, relying on my assets and support. Bob has been living off my money, all the while hiding the fact that he's unemployed. But there's more. Shockingly, Bob and his wife had been using Susie to steal small amounts of cash from my home. I had noticed recently that the cash I'd stored deep in a drawer was missing. I knew it was Susie's doing, but I chose to turn a blind eye. I never imagined she was doing it under her parents' coercion. Bob would forcibly convince a reluctant Susie and order her repeatedly to steal cash. He probably thought that if it's Susie, whom I adore, she wouldn't get into trouble even if she rummaged through stuff at home. Still, kind-hearted and sincere Susie fiercely resisted her parents, knowing that stealing was wrong. When Susie defied them, Bob and his wife threatened her. "If you don't do as told, we'll make you drop out of high school right now." Being told they wouldn't be able to send her to high school without money, Susie had no choice but to comply tearfully. "But I really didn't want to steal from you, Grandma. That's why I secretly started working." That was her only allowed act of rebellion. But the hard-earned money she made was never used for living expenses, plunging Susie into deep despair. Susie's high school had a rule against part-time jobs, and she was confronted by her teacher when they found out. Just add insult to injury. To add to breaking school rules, rumors spread about her mother as a sloppy woman going frequently to bars, making Susie feel out of place at school. She tearfully told me she hasn't been attending school at all lately. "I'd rather go to jail at this rate. Grandma, please call the police. I don't want to go back to that house." Once cash wasn't enough for her parents, they instructed her to steal the checkbooks and bank books. They must have proposed living together and left Susie here to watch for an opportunity to steal my assets. Hearing such shocking words from my high school-aged granddaughter made my mind go blank. The thought that jail might be better than returning to her parents' home. I hugged the sobbing Susie, wondering why she had to endure so much. Something snapped inside me. The intense hatred that sprouted in my heart was directed at Bob and his wife. On behalf of my granddaughter, who was repeatedly begging for forgiveness with a trembling voice, I was determined to get revenge on the two. A few days later, Susie confided everything to me. Bob and his wife again contacted me, suggesting we live together. Since Susie stopped taking cash from my house, they probably thought they had to steal it themselves. Just before my husband passed away, he left inheritance money for both me and Bob. However, Bob had already spent his share long ago. Realizing that the untouched inheritance was still in my house, Bob was no doubt eyeing that money greedily. The last time Bob visited, he nonchalantly asked me where the inheritance was kept. "It's just that scams are so common these days and I'm worried," he said, trying to sound concerned. Aware of Bob's intentions, I, of course, didn't reveal the location of the inheritance. Perhaps angered by my refusal to reveal the location of the inheritance, Bob set his sights on Susie next. He shockingly threatened me using Susie, saying, "If I can't get the money, I might have to pull her out of high school. I'm just asking for a small loan from Dad's inheritance. It's not like I want to take it, right? If that's not possible, could you at least pay for the rent and living expenses?" Bob, no longer trying to hide his true motives, bluntly demanded the money. Susie, who had been listening to our conversation, looked down with tears in her eyes. I was internally flabbergasted, wondering where I went wrong in raising him. Reluctantly, I agreed to let them move in. I had no intention of giving in to their demands, but I had no choice if I wanted to expose their wrongdoing. "Grandma, what should we do? At this rate, they might take everything from us." Susie, in a panicked tone, tried to hold me back, but there was no turning back. "There's nothing to worry about. All you have to do is pretend you don't know anything and watch over them. everything was going according to plan. If they thought I would let them into my house without any strategy, they were sorely mistaken. One quiet afternoon. Not long after I started living with Bob and his wife, a loud alarm would sound in my house. I received a call that someone was trying to break into my room, so I rushed home from school. Even without seeing the face, it was clear who had broken in. A security officer had apprehended the intruder. I sighed when I saw Bob, who was looking flustered. Lucy had a pale face and seemed unable to do anything but stare at Bob. It seemed she had been posted outside the room to keep watch. "How did you do this with your tech illiteracy?" Pointing at the newly installed security cameras and alarm system, Bob yelled. A friend had installed the security measures in my room, where the safe was kept. I had been consulting with this friend about Bob and his family for some time and decided to beef up security on her advice. Bob and his wife had planned to steal only cash from my room and secretly dispose of the bank books and other documents. They dared to take the bank books and other documents to make it look like the work of a robber from outside. Susie had heard about this plan, but since she was so distant from her parents, she told me everything. "Well, you finally showed your true colors. Not working and treating your daughter like a tool. Stealing a mother's savings? You're out of your minds. What's wrong with going into one's parents' room? I'm your family, living here with you. This is just nitpicking." As Bob repeated his excuses in front of the security company representative, I confronted him with various pieces of evidence that Susie and I had gathered. He didn't transfer to another job but was actually fired, which led to them being kicked out of their company-provided home. There are also testimonies from acquaintances that he lied about working and was actually drinking and hanging out during the day. Among those was a claim that Lucy had been frequently visiting luxurious bars and spending a fortune there. Bob seemed unaware of this and stared at Lucy with his mouth agape in surprise. "I don't want to think of you two as my parents. I truly despise you," Susie said, looking straight at her parents, her words filled with disdain. Upon hearing these harsh words from his daughter, Bob became almost hysterical. "I don't know what you've been telling Susie, but she's ours. I'll cut ties with you and make sure we never see each other again. I'll even make her quit high school and work for us for the rest of her life. Enough is enough." The person who shouted at the out-of-control Bob wasn't me, but a friend. As an educator and as a human being, I can't tolerate adults who treat and hurt their precious children like objects. I truly despise you both. "Who the heck is this old lady?" My friend restrained me from responding immediately, shaking her head. "Her name is Nora Peterson." True to her word, she is an educator and had been informed by a fellow teacher about Susie's struggles at school. Right after I consulted Nora about Susie, she started reaching out to school officials and related agencies. Behind the scenes, she was pulling strings to help resolve Susie's problems as soon as possible. "What you've been doing is clear-cut abuse. If you plan on taking her away, I have no problem taking legal action." Nora spoke calmly, but her voice betrayed undeniable anger. Witnessing the fierce demeanor of Nora, they must have finally realized the gravity of the situation. Bob, still restrained, and Lucy were clearly flustered, their gazes wandering aimlessly. Perhaps understanding that siding with Bob wasn't in her best interest, Lucy approached Susie with a shaky gait. "Susie, honey, I know how you feel about your dad, but you wouldn't abandon your mom, right? You still love me, don't you?" Who does Susie think is to blame for her feeling out of place at school? Even though Susie worked her tail off at her part-time job, all the money ended up in her parents' pockets. There's no sympathy left for her mother, who mindlessly spent her time at bars, while never reprimanding her father Bob's misdeeds. Susie hid behind me and Nora, rejecting the hand her mother reached out to her. "You get it now, don't you? This isn't my idea, but a choice Susie made on her own." Both Bob and Lucy, with quivering lips, send us despair-filled looks. It's too little too late now, no matter how much they regret. In exchange for not getting the law involved with everything that happened now or in the past, I made sure the couple promised never to show up in front of me again. After ensuring the couple left, I repeatedly thanked the security company's staff and asked him to leave. I expressed my deepest gratitude to Nora, who supported us until the end. Nora kindly listened to words from a downtrodden Susie before she left us. You know, I had dreams until I was in middle school. There was this high school I wanted to attend, and I worked hard studying to get in. The high school Bob and Lucy told her to give up on due to lack of money was a reputable private high school in town, kinda like a sought-after prep school in Massachusetts. From then on, Susie, having lost her dreams, didn't immerse herself in high school life and lost her spirit, she shared. After hearing Susie's story, Nora warmly smiled. That's the high school where your grandmother volunteers. Why don't you try taking the entrance exams in the fall? Susie looked up at Nora's words. Oh my, it's not every day that the principal personally invites you. Susie, it's never too late to chase your dreams, right? With wide eyes, Susie murmured. The principal? And shared a laugh with me while gazing at Nora. Susie clung to the school brochure handed to her by Nora as if it was a treasured possession. Months passed, from summer to fall and fall to winter. As for the couple, a heated argument in their cramped apartment led the neighbors to call the cops. The money Lucy took from Bob, which she spent all on some guy at a bar, was probably one of the reasons. Bob lost his temper when told, "If there's no money, there's no reason to stay together." I heard through the grapevine that the incident led to their divorce. Being abandoned by his younger wife, whom he doted on, Bob seemed to be completely down and out, but now appears to have settled down. On the other hand, with encouragement from Principal Nora, Susie decided to transfer to her original first-choice high school starting in September. With available scholarship programs and special student privileges, there's nothing to worry about financially. Receiving advice from my friend Nora, child consultation centers, and related organizations, I officially became Susie's guardian. Instead of commuting from my home, Susie decided to live in the school dormitory. Because the couple knew the location of my house, we decided it was best for Susie not to live with me for her safety. Yet, I don't feel lonely. I'm still pretty clueless about technology and finances, but thanks to my granddaughter, I'm starting to think about the future. I'm consulting with a lawyer to find the best way to leave an inheritance for Susie without burdening her. When I went to do my volunteer work and met Susie at the school, she was surrounded by many friends. Seeing the radiant happiness on my granddaughter's face, I felt deeply relieved.